Good morning. The United States Food and Drug Administration, FDA, with the support of the Medical Device Regulatory Convergence Project, co-led by USAID, ANSI, and AdvaMed through the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence in the Medical Technology Sector, welcomed you to the second part of this series of 3 webinar sessions on ISO 13485 and Medical Device Single Audit Program Outcomes Utilization for Regulatory Purposes. We will get started reminding all participants that this session is being recorded for future posting on the Coalition's website. Simultaneous translation is available, so you may listen to the presenters in English, Portuguese, or Spanish by selecting your preferred language at the icon located at the bottom of your screen. We would appreciate all the speakers to open your cameras when participating in order to facilitate the simultaneous translation. The presentations and materials can also be accessed in your preferred language through the link that was emailed on Monday to all registered participants. We are very pleased to have a large number of attendees from 20 different countries, 11 national regulatory authorities, and almost 140 private entities. This size of an audience makes it challenging to open microphones to ask questions. Therefore, we would appreciate your posting them at the Q&A section located at the bottom of your screen. May the session's coordinators voice them to the presenters. During this session, we will be learning from an auditing organization, DECRA, specific regulatory requirements would address them. We kindly invite all attendees for an active participation as we consider this exercise a great learning opportunity through an open dialogue. Without further ado, now let me introduce Besa Bunici, who will share a welcome message. Besa is an international relations specialist at the Latin America Office, U.S. Food and Drug Administration, where she is responsible for medical products program activities in the region. Before her current position, Ms. Bunici worked at the Center for Devices and Radiological Health, CDRH FDA, as an assistant director responsible for pre-market evaluation and post-market activities related to orthopedic devices, and as a compliance officer working on post-market compliance activities for medical devices. In the past 3 years, Ms. Bunici has supported the Medical Device Single Audit Program by conducting numerous witness and assessment audits in collaboration with other regulatory agencies. In addition, she has over 5 years of experience as an investigator with the FDA and is an ASQ certified quality auditor. Ms. Bunici received her bachelor's degree in chemistry and biological sciences and a master's degree in biomedical engineering from the Wayne State University. Thank you, Besa, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second session of the Medical Device Webinar Series focusing on MDSAP inspections. This series of webinars are aimed to promote a better understanding of the MDSAP as a tool for regulatory convergence. It is evident that no regulatory agency has all the resources needed to have oversight and complete surveillance inspections to all medical device manufacturers. And this is why tools like MDSAP allow for better use of resources in a smart and reliable manner. In addition, harmonization of medical devices provides an opportunity for global access to safe and high quality devices. This became even more apparent during the COVID-19 pandemic, where regulatory agencies had to rely on decisions of other agencies to make their missions of protecting the public. It is an opportunity to continue their reliance in a more structured way by aligning requirements and standards. And to achieve this aim, this workshop is intended to provide a forum to facilitate exchange of information. To get the most out of this session, we encourage the regulatory agencies to actively participate in this case study and that we have prepared for you today. At this point, I would like to take the opportunity to thank each and every one of you for participating in this webinar. With that, I will invite Sandra to introduce the first topic. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Besa, for your message. And now let me introduce Billie Jo Marie Johnson, BJ for short. She graduated from the University of Wisconsin, River Falls with a major in biology and a minor in chemistry. BJ began her career over 20 years ago as a microbiologist working on a medical device manufactured out of human and animal tissues. She has worked at companies that manufacture medical devices from bandages to permanent implants. She also worked at the USFDA as a consumer safety officer investigator, performing inspections for medical devices, human tissue, and sterilization facilities. She also has worked in the medical device quality organizations at several medical device companies, working in multiple quality areas such as CAPAs, complaints, quality engineering, corporate auditor, and quality manager. BJ has been an ASQ certified quality auditor since 2001 and currently is working as a project manager for DECRA certification BV. BJ, thank you for having accepted our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to try to share my screen again and get this hopefully started properly. Okay, just want to verify everybody can see my slides.
Perfectly, thank you.
Okay, all right, good morning. And today I will, starting out, this presentation is just going to walk you through the DECRA process of how we do MDSAP audits. I would say this is probably similar to other notified bodies and auditing organizations as to how we do it, with each of has their slight change or process that they would do. But
eu vou aqui na configuração, peraí.
Okay, so as the agenda, we will talk about the audits and the audit cycles, our audit planning, our agenda, our audit report, a little bit of how we record MDSAP nonconformities and how we follow up on those nonconformities, a little bit on our post-audit processing, and a little bit of talking just through the training we receive for MDSAP and our code of conduct.
Eu vou lá no configurações aqui, eu venho no configurações. Ontem estava aparecendo aqui o Bluetooth, aqui ativa ele.
So today we are starting out, like I said, just to talk a little bit of how does DECRA conduct their MDSAP audits. So first I want to talk a little bit on our audit process when it comes to MDSAPs. So there is what we call a 3-year audit cycle, which means that within a 3-year period, we will assure that each manufacturer has all their systems covered. However, we do break down audits a little bit during that 3-year cycle. So initially, we have what's called our initial audit, which would be the first audit at a site. A customer would request to have MDSAP added to their certification scope, and we would conduct an initial audit. After that, we do, that would be considered year 1. After that, we would do 2 surveillance audits, which would then finish the 3-year cycle. And then we start again, although this time we do not have to do an initial audit again, we do what we call a recertification audit. There are some special audits that we can do during this time. Special audits are those that we would not necessarily do every year. They could be audits of manufacturer suppliers who do, if a manufacturer were to outsource the entire manufacturing process, we would then do a special audit at that manufacturer because we would not want to certify the device without seeing the actual manufacturer audits. They also can be what we call unannounced audits, which are during that cycle, if there is something that we see that we determine needs to be verified, we might do an unannounced audit and show up and just do a one-day check on some minor processes, not the entire quality management system. But they can occur during any time during that audit cycle. So just to talk a little bit more about the audit types. Like I said, the first time a customer would contact us, we will do an initial audit. It actually is broken into two parts. We call them stage 1 and stage 2. Our stage 1 audit is normally just a document review. We're looking to see, do they have a quality system in place? Does it meet the minimum requirements for MDSAP? Are they really ready or prepared for a full-blown audit to the MDSAP process? So we're looking here to say, okay, through the MDSAP process, there are specific regulations, specific requirements, I should say, that for each of the MDSAP countries. So as an example, Brazil has some specific requirements. We'll make sure that the systems are in place to cover all of those requirements. We then, 30 days later, we'll schedule at least 30 days later, schedule a stage 2. So during the stage 1 audit, anything that we note that maybe is not quite up to ready to be audited, we'll let the site know. We give them at least 30 days and up to 6 months to fix any gaps that we may have noted during the stage 1, and then we will schedule what we call our stage 2. This audit will be conducted fully in accordance with the ISO IEC 17021, and then obviously the full MDSAP audit process will happen. This audit tends to be several days long. A lot of times we'll take 2 auditors in because sometimes it'll be actually longer than a full week to finish. So with 2 auditors, we can get it done in a shorter time period. Once the stage 2 audit is complete, this would be the first time they would be issued non-conformances. So anything that maybe that was found during the stage 1 that was not corrected by stage 2 would then be issued as a non-conformance. And then after all non-conformances are addressed appropriately, we will then issue them a MDSAP certificate, and the 3-year cycle has now begun. Like I said earlier, then we will do what are called surveillance audits for the next 2 years. Again, conducted per the ISO IEC 17021 and the MDSAP audit tasks. For a little more information on what a surveillance audit means, the surveillance audits do not cover all MDSAP requirements during each audit. So what we'll do is we will determine during one surveillance audit to do what I would say about half of the quality management system, and the other surveillance audit, we will cover the other half. However, there are certain items that at each surveillance audit we will look at just because of the risk of those systems. So one is each time we go out, we will look to review changes in the manufacturer's quality management system, any new products, any necessary changes that would have possibly needed to have regulatory submissions along with them. We will go through those, clarify, and assure that all submissions were completed at that point in time. Then we also each time, like I said, based on risk, we'll look at the management process. We will look at CAPAs and complaints, and we will look at medical device adverse event reporting. We also will look at any marketing authorization, facility registration processes. Again, we're trying to make sure that there's been no new products that have been added where the proper registrations have not been completed and authorizations have not been held, as well as if they are, we will verify if they say, let's say they're not selling into Japan, we will verify at this point that there were no sales actually held in Japan. And then the last thing, we don't look at the full design and development process each time, but we will, again, verify new products. If there were new products, did you go through the proper design process? If no new products, then depending on which surveillance audit it is, we could possibly look at design or we may not. So that being said, like I said, so we won't look at every process each time. So we will look, let's say as an example, if during the first surveillance audit, we look at design and development in the full process, we will then go to the second surveillance audit, and this time we will look at production and process controls. So we want to make sure that we are covering the entire quality management system again during those two surveillance audits. And then when we get done with the 3-year cycle, we have looked at the entire process from beginning to end. The purchasing process is usually scheduled into one of the surveillance audits. However, again, if each time we will ask the questions if they have any new suppliers, critical suppliers that we need to be aware of. If they do, we will verify that the purchasing process was completed for that new supplier, even if it's not on the agenda for that specific surveillance audit. So that's our surveillance audit process. Recertifications audits. So as I said, after the initial audit, the audits after that, every 3rd year, are called a recertification audit. This audit does not require the stage 1 audit again. Since we have been out there, we know that their system is in place. We don't expect to find any large gaps. So this audit, again, is a longer audit than the surveillance audit. However, it will be, and it's still conducted to the ISO IEC 17021 and the MDSAP process. And I will cover a little bit more information here on recertification audits. So again, at this point in time, we are saying, so our certificates for MDSAP will be issued for 3 years. The expiration date will be right at the 3-year mark from the date that we issue that. So prior to the certificate expiring, we will go out to do a recertification audit, which will allow us to issue another certificate for 3 years. These audits will be assuring that we have continued effectiveness and suitability of the organization's quality management system as a whole. And we want to assure that they are still meeting all the requirements of ISO 13485 and the MDSAP requirements prior to issuing that new certificate. And it'll also then confirm the continued relevance and applicability of the organization's QMS to those specific certification. These can be shorter than the initial audits. However, at this point in time, we are still doing a sample of records. So during the initial audit, we will look at every procedure, every record that's usually kind of available at that point in time. When we do a recertification, we will say, okay, we've been there the last 2 years. We've seen that management reviews have been happening and we've looked at those records. We will now only look at the management reviews that came since the last audit. And so thus it allows us to still cover the quality management system in the 3 years, because each year we are looking at something, but it allows us to break it apart and not have at that recertification audit to have to look at 3 years worth of data. Again, just kind of walking through what we will look at. So we will look at, as a prep to this audit, we will review the 3 audit reports that have happened. So the initial and the 2 surveillance, and assure that during that time, all audit findings, non-conformances that we had were closed. If not, we will close them during this audit. And any action items that we might have noted during the things like to update maybe scopes or those kinds of things have been completed prior to issuing a new certificate. We also will look at the changes the manufacturer has, again, saying anything since the last audit that you have done, new products, new systems, new buildings, anything that could have changed during the manufacturing process, their quality management systems, or in products. We will also then review the effectiveness and suitability of the QMS during that current audit cycle. So we will look at, in the 3 years, have we had any repeat non-conformances? Have we had anything that might cause us to question recertifying this product for another 3 years? And then during this audit, we will cover all the applicable MDSAP audit process tasks. So if you were in the presentation last week, we went through the audit tasks where each chapter has several tasks within those chapters. We will assure that those tasks each get touched at some point during this recertification audit. And again, we're looking at this just to say, okay, is there any new potential or existing nonconformances? Is there any new product designs, any modified processes, anything that during this 3 years we didn't look at sufficiently? So if, let's say, since the last audit, they added a new production line, we will most likely look at that production line during this recertification audit so that we feel like during the 3 years we've looked across the entire production process. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of our audit processes and how we do those. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about our audit planning. Planning happens at DECRA with something that we call our test plan. This test plan is created whenever the certification scope, the locations, how many audits we would need for that cycle of 3 years, and it will be what we use each year to plan our audits. This is kind of what I would call as our roadmap to assure that we know what we will be doing during this certification cycle. And then at the end of each certification cycle, it'll be updated again with the new cycle, the new audits that will be planned, any changes that maybe were needed in certification scope, any added locations, products, those will be added then at that time. We at DECRA are not allowed to audit without this test plan being created. So if I do not have a test plan, I am not allowed to schedule an audit. So just to kind of work through what this all entails with a little more details. So the first thing we would do is the client identification, meaning legal name of the auditee, any locations, and the facility identification number that is used for the MDSAP process. We then also look at assuring that when they ask us to do MDSAP, that the product actually is a medical device. So we're assuring that we are meeting the definition of a medical device in the MDSAP regions and that they have the correct classification of those devices, and we'll record that on our test plan. We will also talk about what is needed for qualified audit team members, meaning what type of expertise is necessary. Is it just a medical device that is non-sterile? Is it a device that is sterilized? Is it a device that's sterilized on site? So within DECRA, each of us auditors have a qualification based on our background and trainings and any kind of work that we've done that we can do. So in my case, my background is microbiology. I do not work on devices that have electronics in it because we then would require somebody who has maybe as an electrical engineer or a background through electronics so that they can have the proper knowledge when they go out and do audits. So we will set that up within our test plan to say, okay, these are the types of auditors we will need for each audit. We also then kind of put a short assessment of the completeness of their QMS documentation, just what type of system they have, whether it be electronic, whether or not, just so that we have just a slight understanding prior to going out, especially since if you have multiple auditors, you may sometimes be pulling in an auditor who has never gone to this site before. We also will note the language of the audit. So obviously for myself, it's always in English, but we do have auditors that speak Spanish, speak German, Dutch. If we do need a specific language of the audit, especially if it's when you're going to the production floor where people may not speak English like the managers at the facilities, we will make sure that the person who is going out has the proper language to be able to conduct the audit. We will talk about the terms of agreement with the manufacturer. Again, we will just go through whether or not they understand that this will be a 3-year cycle, that we are doing MDSAP only, that those aspects are all set up prior to conducting the audit. We also will discuss which sites, so if there's multiple sites, which sites will be audited and at what point. And also on this, we will note the critical suppliers and we'll make decisions based on those suppliers, whether or not they needed to be audited. So supplier audits tend to only be done if it's a site, like I said, that does a full medical device final product for if they are outsourcing the entire process, or if they do not hold an ISO certificate already. So if using a sterilizer as an example, we don't do a lot of the sterilization facilities because all of them are already ISO 1345 certified by a auditing organization. So we'll make those decisions and put that on the test plan. We then, like I said, talk about audit days, the auditors that are needed, and the time. So it's very important that we have planned time for each audit that we will then tell the manufacturer, we plan on being there for 3 days. We will come in, the audit should be no longer, no shorter than that's 3 days. And then we do a peer review process on these to make sure that once I've created it, that I haven't made a mistake, just to assure that everything is properly documented so that when I go out and I tell them, okay, here's the audits we plan to do, this is the sites we plan to go to, this is the supplier we plan to go to, that's actually what should be done, and that I'm not surprising anyone with all of a sudden adding a new audit into the process. So those are our test plans. I wanted to talk to you just a little bit about time calculations. So as I said before, it's very important to us that we give a time for an audit and we stick to that time. So to do this, we do have what we call our calculation sheet, which aids us in determining how long an MDSAP audit is going to take. So the sheet will ask the number of audit tasks that will be needed during that audit. And it breaks it down to an initial, the surveillance, and the recertification audit. So we will check which tasks are involved in each audit. The sheet then tells us, okay, based on those number of tasks, this is the number of audit days that you will need to complete this audit. We can adjust this time based on a few factors. One is number of sites. The more sites, the more time we're going to need. Number of employees. So we do look at usually a site with 3 employees tends to have a simpler quality management system. Factor that in based on the more employees, usually the more records, the more processes, and everything that we will need to go through. We also will look at tasks that don't need to be performed, like installation and servicing as an example. A lot of times our sites do not need to have those. So like I said, it'll calculate, if I choose no for that section, it'll calculate less time. Tasks that need duplication. So one of the sections, chapter 2, the device marketing authorization and facility registrations, needs to be covered for each MDSAP location. So it can range from, we've had places that only sell into one country. And so we only have to look at one, using the US maybe as an example. I would only need to look at the FDA registration and authorizations, or it could be all 5. So we will add additional time for each of those markets that we have to look into for registration information. And then sometimes we do add more time in for what we call complex or operations, such as on-site sterilization, mainly because we need to bring a special auditor out that has been properly trained in our sterilization process, and because it is something that we will spend extra time on when it comes to manufacturing, where we'll look at both the standard manufacturing and the sterilization process. Again, just to kind of clarify a little more, I talked about multiple sites. One of the things I just wanted to point out here is that obviously, if there are 2 sites that both are conducting manufacturing, we have to double our manufacturing time to make sure that we cover processes at both sites. It's not, it is that the audit time is cumulative. So what we will do is to say, if manufacturing is, let's say, calculated as 4 hours, we will say 4 hours for site number 1, 4 hours for site number 2, which would then add an extra 4 hours to our audit time. However, if the sites use items such as the same, let's say, document control system, we will only do that once. We will say, okay, for document controls, we will cover it at whichever site manages that process. And at the other site, we will only do those tasks that are different. And then one of the big points here is sampling is not allowed when it comes to design and manufacturing. So like I said before, if activities are being performed at a site, we will make sure that we look at both of those activities together. And then just talking a little bit about organization size. So we do have to maintain documented evidence that we have determined this calculation and that we have met the days that the calculation is on there. So we will, like I said, somewhat look at larger organizations will usually have a slight addition to that time calculation with a justification as to why those have been added, just based on the number of records sampling will usually go up. We do sample using kind of a square root of n+1. So if I have 100 CAPAs that came in the last year, I'm going to sample more than if you've only had 10. Okay, so I just wanted to give you just a brief audit time calculation example, just so that to try to explain this a little bit more in the context of the actual numbers. So we start out all the time, our calculation is based on the IAF MD9. That document calls out clear information on audit timings. So if that document would indicate that this audit would need to be a 7.5-day audit for recertification, that means that total auditor time needs to be 7.5 days. Obviously, we would cut that down between 2 auditors for 3.25 days to make it more reasonable of an audit time rather than spending 2 weeks at a site. So based on all of those calculations that we just talked about, all those reasons, adjustments could be made. So in this case, if we said, hey, this site actually outsources all production activities, our calculation sheet would automatically reduce it by 15% to say, okay, there's no production at this facility. There's no reason to assume that time is needed. So thus it'll change the days to 6.5 audit days. And then that would represent the 100% on-site audit time to make sure that all those tasks were to be performed. We would then take the production time and add that to a supplier audit to assure that those production activities still were covered. However, it would be in a separate audit calculation sheet for that process only. Okay, so moving on, just talking through the agenda a little bit. So we do create our agendas, obviously based on the type of audit and the amount of time that that audit calculation sheet states. It'll note that which standards and regulations are applicable. So we can do multiple processes together. So the agenda could really cover everything from a CE audit for Europe, ISO, and MDSAP. And then we will note each of which country would be applicable to this audit. So if they do all 5, or if they do just 1, that'll be noted in our agenda. Our tasks will be noted on each item so that you can, as a manufacturer, see which tasks tie into which of the agenda items. And again, if it's got other country-specific regulations such as CE, we'll make sure that those are added in as a topic to the agenda. So just a quick cut and paste out of an agenda would show which auditor is covering which sections, the time, and then as you can see, so that we have management processes tasks 1 through 6, the other auditor doing management processes tasks 7 through 8, so that each agenda would be clarified for the client what is covered and who will cover it. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about conducting the audit and the report. So obviously we follow the MDSAP audit approach. We do complete the review of the documents, people actually doing their work, and we do the chapters in order per the MDSAP process. However, I just wanted to note that tasks are not necessarily done in order. So if you're in the chapter for management, we may not necessarily go task 1, task 2, task 3. We will do those whatever fits our audit style. Many of the auditors will ask for a tour at the beginning of the audit and then start into the tasks. And the questions that each auditor uses could be taken directly from that MDSAP audit approach or just asked in a different manner. But we do, like I said, follow the approach. We might just ask questions in a different manner to get the information. We make sure that all the tasks are completed. And then if there are 2 auditors, sometimes the tasks can't be done completely in order. We will do them concurrently. So, and as an example, document and records control sometimes could be done during management review at the same time, just to assure that we can get the audit done in the amount of time we have. And then country-specific regulations are covered under the specific task where it's located. So for Brazil, as an example, they have a specific addition to verify that change records include a description of the change, identification of the affected documents, signature of the approving individuals, the approval date, and when the change becomes effective. We will actually look at that during management task number 8 and assure that that was completed. So each of those will be called out in the MDSAP approach under their specific tasks, and that is when we will follow through with that information. The audit reports are then prepared using the online MDSAP audit report form. This is a PDF form where we will fill in specific fields. The standard outline of the report will always be the same for all MDSAP audits, but just the data we enter into it will change. This audit report fulfills the requirements of the GD 211, and the language of this report is will be subject to the auditing organization. So you can do the language in, let's say in our Netherlands facility, they will do it in Dutch. However, we also have to have those reports available in English. So usually our reports are all done in English. For multi-sites, an audit report for each of the sites is generated. However, sometimes we have what we call a physical campus for our larger customers. They might have 5 buildings within a 1 block area of each other. In those cases, it's one audit report. We will just note which buildings we went into. The audit report actually contains 18 sections, and I'm just going to give you a brief thing. We will go through this afternoon a little more on what each audit report section is, but this is the way that the report looks. So you can see the blue highlighted areas are the areas that we are allowed to change. The rest of the information is locked and is not able to be changed. And then I'm not going to go through each of these sections with you, but you can see here that each section has its own area. Each section is something very specific to something that the 5 MDSAP regions have asked to see. Section 11 is the one I want to point out, and that's the main body of the report. There's actually a section 11.1, 0.2, and so on for each of the chapters within the MDSAP audit approach. And that's really where we're going to type in what we saw, the records we looked at, who we spoke to, and note if there was non-conformances that then will be called out in section 12 in more detail. Okay, so just a brief thing on non-conformities. And so there is a separate non-conformity form within the MDSAP process. I have an example of that after this that I'll show you. Again, it's a locked form. It's a PDF form where we can fill in certain areas. It then allows the manufacturer also to fill in their corrective action plans and completion of those plans to return to us so that we can verify that non-conformances are properly being corrected prior to the next audit. If we do, the one thing that's very specific to an MDSAP process, if we do find a non-conformity, let's say that the manufacturer had previously identified and it's already has a CAPA open on it. There is a section of this that allows us to do what's called a tracking non-conformance. So if they've issued a CAPA, but the CAPA is not closed, and I still want to make sure that the CAPA is closed and the issue is fixed, I can do this trending non-conformance where it'll state that the non-conformance was previously identified, and then I can at the next audit assure that that CAPA was closed and that the corrections and corrective actions were completed. And then there's also a section that it would say the organization detected and properly addressed this non-conformance prior to the audit, which is if it completely closed that non-conformance. So this is our non-conformity sheet. You can't see, it was getting too small and I didn't want to make it too small, but there's more information below this where the manufacturer can fill in their responses to these non-conformances. But you can see it will give the grade, the MDSAP grade. It'll give also a brief statement of the non-conformance, what the ISO clause was. With the MDSAP grade, we will also note if it's a major or minor non-conformance and then what their status is. It'll update as they fill in information. The status will update it as to responded, to closed, and so on. Just kind of wanted to talk a little bit through the process for how we deal with non-conformance grading within the MDSAP system. So we do, like I said, give them a major, minor, but there is the grading system 1 through 5 with MDSAP. So in our realm, we consider grades 1 through 3 more to be a minor non-conformance. So, and follow up with those will begin 6 months after we close the audit. However, NC grades 4 and 5 are considered more major non-conformances, and they will be actively updated throughout the process. So we will ask for a response within 15 days. We will make sure within 90 days that they have closed that nonconformance, and it is a much higher process. obviously, at the conclusion of the initial audit, we want to make sure that there's no what we would consider major non-conformances. And so if there are one or more grade 5 or 2 or more grade 4s, it's an automatic notification to the MDSAP authorities to say, hey, this site is got some major issues going on here. The certificates may be needing to be taken away. So that is something that we do follow very closely and allow the different regions to know as well. Again, if there are any of those grade 5s or 2 or more grade 4s, we will then do an unannounced audit. We talked about this earlier. This will make sure that their processes are ongoing to be getting fixed, that we are assuring that they are actually fixing the issues and not just telling us that they are. And so in this case, they're really focused on those non-conformances and any actions the manufacturer is taking in our assessment to say, yes, we feel the manufacturer is really working on this, is really trying to fix this, so that then in those cases, sometimes the certificates will not be taken away. They just will be put on hold for a short period of time in our system. It doesn't change for their systems, but it's on our system. We're still saying, okay, we're going to keep looking at this to assure that by the next audit, we haven't changed our minds. If we go in and these audits are not, we're finding that they're not taking actions, we will remove the certificates. Okay, and the last thing I just kind of wanted to talk through a little bit is post-audit. So post-audit, I talked a little bit about when we do follow-up. So we have really 5 different aspects of what we will do for a post-audit follow-up. And the first one is the 5 working days. So this is if they have any grade 5 or 2 or more grade 4, we will automatically, after express to them that we need a response in 5 days, because then we will notify the MDSAP regions that this has happened and here is what they are trying to do to fix it. 15 calendar days then is for them to give us a full planned corrective action for a grade 5 or 2 grade 4s. 30 calendar days is for anything that is less than that, for them to give us corrective action, and also for them to start addressing those grade 5 or 4 nonconformities. 45 days after the end of the audit, this is when our audit package is due. We will assure that the audit report is complete, the nonconformances are complete with the planned actions, and submit all that information for the MDSAP regions to start seeing. And then the 90 days is our full report that has met all the criteria for the responses to any of their major findings and their grade 4s and grade 5s. As I said, the final version then is uploaded into it's actually into a system that allows the auditing organization to put in the information so that all of the MDSAP regions can review that. With the report, we will also give the agenda, a list of critical suppliers, and the nonconformity sheet. That is the separate sheet that has the client's responses. If any nonconformity was issued, we will keep corresponding with the manufacturer to get those closed. And that information then, as it's updated, will also be updated into the to the regulatory authorities so that they can see, as our process is going along, what we're doing. And then there is a possibility that sometimes the regulatory authorities will ask for special updates. If it's something that's usually a grade 5, they can come to us. And if they do that request, we have 10 calendar days to get them the information that they have requested. And then we don't necessarily share that the final closure of minors. Majors, we usually update and share that information. Sometimes minors, because we will just do that follow-up at the next audit. And so they will see it in the next audit report. So that's kind of the report processing and how the regulatory authorities get that information. I just wanted to just really quickly go through our training process, which is just that we do complete the MDSAP training on the FDA Learning Portal. We are monitored during our training process to assure that we are doing them correctly before they let us go out on our own. We will receive feedback. We do have a final qualification audit where we do the entire audit ourselves. Somebody will say, yep, they've done everything correctly. They are now allowed to do MDSAP audits. And then we do annual training as well on the MDSAP process to assure that if there's been any changes that have been made by the MDSAP group, that we are updated on those processes. And then the last thing, I'm not going to necessarily go through this rule, but just that we do have an auditor code of conduct, which does talk about acting professional, being truthful, having to disclose any relationships or financial interests that we might have with any company that we should, so in that case, should not be auditing, and those kinds of things. So I just wanted to point that out, that is part of our process to assure that our audits are being conducted fair for the customer, and also that we're following any of the regulatory aspects. And that's all, and I'm sorry, I think I went maybe a little over, but do we have any questions? And I don't know if I can see the questions.
Thank you, BJ. Yes, we do have 3 questions, and we still have a few minutes to go over them. So I can read them out loud for you. So we have one question from an anonymous attendees. What is the difference between planning for a MDSAP audit and planning for an ISO 13485 audit?
So really the difference would be the extra regulatory issues. So the specifics for the different MDSAP countries that we add in time for those, and then for the regulatory filings and registrations. So if we were doing an ISO only, I'm not focusing so much on a specific country as I am the ISO 1345 document, versus MDSAP, we're using 1345 as a base, but then we were really digging into the specifics for those countries and their regulations.
Perfect. Thank you, BJ. We have another question. How many certificates are issued if a manufacturer has more than one manufacturing site? For example, if a manufacturer has 3 sites, are 3 certificates made, or is there a single certificate where the 3 sites are declared?
It depends on the location of the sites. So if they are in close proximity together, we have issued 1 certificate for both sites within a mile or so of each other. But usually if they have sites, let's say in 3 different cities across a country, then it would be 3 separate certificates.
Okay, thank you. We have another one. When do the notification bodies share their MDSAP report with the national authorities?
So that would be when it's logged into the MDSAP system. When we upload everything, all of the MDSAP countries and the regulatory authorities are able then at that point in time to see that audit report.
Thank you. Based on your experience as an auditor, why is medical device expertise, training, and auditor assessment important for MDSAP? And what should be done when the auditor does not meet the profile to do the audit?
So the training comes down to understanding the product well enough to assure that you're doing a proper audit. Quality management systems are basic, not really basic, but I would say anybody can learn a quality management system and understand that the basis of a CAPA process, needs inputs, and it has to have corrective actions and corrections and stuff like that taken. But when it comes to the product itself, if you, like taking myself an example, I do not have an electronics background. I have done, when I worked with the FDA, I have done inspections of pacemakers. I had lots of questions. I had come back to the office sometimes and ask questions to somebody who understands the process better. So we at DECRA feel that we want to make sure the person understands the product. So when they go out, if they see something, they understand, hey, that's not right. And so it's very important that you have that background, especially I would say the electronics is one, sterilization is another. If you do not understand a sterilization process and how it works and understand, how do you get to a sterility assurance level, you could totally miss something and actually be allowing product that's non-sterile out the door, which would be a very big risk. So in our case, because we set this up prior to, we would always make sure, based on my plan, it says I need a sterilization expert, it says I need somebody who understands electronics, and it says that I could need somebody who understands just general medical devices. We will look at all of our backgrounds. We actually have a spreadsheet that breaks that down for us and say, these are all in there. If I were to go out, let's say, and I do an audit of a sterilization facility and I am not a sterilization expert, that audit becomes invalid and we have to do it all over again. So we're very careful. We do not want to do that.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. There is here another question. Does MDSAP homologates or adapts to local regulation as ISO 13485 does?
So I believe the only country that technically has done that is where we've been really specific to that is Canada. So Canada actually requires that you have MDSAP audits to sell into their country. The rest of the locations look at it more as, I would say, a help to their auditing organization process. So it's really so that we can aid in giving customers one audit for multiple locations, right? Because they can be bombarded with audits throughout the year. So this is trying to simplify that process to say, hey, we'll come in, we can do 5 countries audits for you all at one point in time. But they really don't, it's not part of their registrations or their regulations. Sorry, that's the word I want to say. It's not a part of their regulations per se. It's more that it is that they will accept these audit reports as if they were coming out themselves. So like using the US as an example, the US can accept MDSAP reports rather than them going out each year and doing a specific inspection at that facility.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thank you. We have a couple of other questions and we have like 1 minute. So in here, it's in Spanish. I'll translate it the best I can. What is the impact on the certification of a manufacturer when there is a non-conformity grade 5 at a critical supplier?
So it would happen the same way as well, let me take a step back. Let me answer it this way. When we do a supplier audit, the audit report is actually sent to the manufacturing site that is our client, not to that supplier. Our client is responsible for assuring that those non-conformances are fixed. So if a grade 5, say at a supplier was issued, it is the manufacturing sites, call them, their responsibility and their certificate could be removed if they are not assuring that that supplier is fixing the issue.
Okay, thank you. We have one very last question, if you allow me. I know we are on the top of the hour, but I'd like to ask that one. It is in regards of the scale from 1 to 5 to classify non-conformities. How is that developed? And if criteria to weight nonconformities is also identified as criteria under the MDSAP?
Yes, so it's actually in the MDSAP modules is where they determined how to get to a grade 1 versus a grade 5. So in simplistic terms, it's actually, there's a lot that goes into this, but in a simplistic way, a grade 1 would be something that does not affect product. It is not something that is systemic across the several different systems. It is something that we see that is a one-time issue, most likely a quality systems issue that is very, very minor. A grade 5, more or less, is I'm telling you when I issue a grade 5 that you're shipping product that's non-conforming. So each of those grades in between takes a step up. So to go from a grade 1 to a grade 2 can be that maybe grade 1 was found last audit. I found it again this audit. That automatically moves it up a step. And it just keeps working in that process with building on each other. So I believe if it is product related, and I'm going off the top of my head here, but if it's something to do with non-conforming product, it starts at a grade 3 and goes up from there based on the other issues, whether it's a repeat, whether or not it's something that we know product has been shipped and those kinds of issues. So it is a step-based process, and it is very well, I believe, explained in that MDSAP manual.
Perfect. Vijay, thank you very much. That was the last question that we had. So thank you very much for those questions. And now let's get into the next part of our meeting today. We will get now then into our case study, for which I would like to welcome and introduce Patricia Pineda, for most of us better known as Patty, who will moderate the discussion. Ms. Pineda joined FDA Mexico on March 2013, where she has collaborated on the medical products portfolio of the Latin America office. She has a Bachelor on Science and Chemistry, Pharmacology, and Biology from the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, and a Master on Science degree on Toxicology from the Centro de Investigación y Estudios Avanzados from the National Polytechnical Institute. She started her professional career in the pharmaceutical industry in the production area. In 2001, she joined the Mexican government as head of the toxicology department of the Environmental Health General Directorate under the Ministry of Health of Mexico, participating in the development of the risk assessment area. For 10 years, Ms. Pineda was manager of international affairs on drugs at the Federal Commission for the Protection from the Sanitary Risks, COFEPRIS, where she coordinated COFEPRIS's participation and represented this regulatory authority in international fora regarding drugs, medical devices, dietary supplements, cosmetics, toxic substances, and pesticides, such as Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, APEC, the WHO World Health Assembly, the Pan-American Network for Drug Regulation Harmonization, PANDRA, the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Forum, IPRF, the Global Health Task Force, GHTF, the US, Mexico, and Canada Trilateral Cooperation, the United Nations Environmental Program, among others. Ms. Pineda also represented APEC as a regional harmonization initiative at the International Conference of Harmonization, ICH. Patty, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandra. So to facilitate the next session, I'm going to ask Murillo if you could go to the channel in English so I can speak in Spanish and make a little bit faster the discussion with our regulatory authorities in Latin America. Okay.
I've done so.
Perfect. Ok, muchas gracias. La siguiente sección es un estudio de caso.
Thank you very much. So the next session is a case study giving us an example, and we will have some highlights of the non-conformities found and BJ will also comment on the specifications that we have regarding MDSAP. We will then have a panel with the regulatory authorities that we have participating today. Could you explain to us what are these specific non-conformities so we can open up the discussion about the problems that we find? So Billy Joe, the floor is yours so that we can start the discussion.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here, which has the document that we have shared with everyone. So this is a Word document that we created from the PDF, since the PDF is rather difficult to understand. Trying to make this a little easier, showing section 12, which is where we discuss our nonconformities. Just to give you a quick brief overview. So the NC reference number is just a number that each auditing organization will create. It's random. It's something that each one will be slightly different. So not so much of interest to you other than just to know that that's how we denote our nonconformances. Then we'll have the statement and supporting evidence, the ISO clause, and then the MDSAP grade, and then if it was major or minor. So I'll talk through each of these three and then we can discuss. So first point we have, what I did is our major number 1, which was the release of product into inventory was not always done after planned arrangements has been completed. So as we talked about the grading systems, this could be a 4 or a 5. In this case, I did make this a 4 because although it was released, the product was not shipped. So that is one of the things to think about in this, the grading system is, although the product could have been released, because it wasn't, we gave it a slightly less rating than we would have had the product actually left the facility. So obviously very bad to release product that doesn't have proper testing data, which would be why we gave it as a 4 and are also calling it a major. The next 2 items are 2 where I deemed them minor nonconformances. So the first one, the information gathered in the feedback process does not always serve as potential input to risk management. In this case, complaint handling is something that per the MDSAP process is a higher risk process. So we gave this as a, what they would call as a 3 in the MDSAP ratings. However, it still is falling under the minor category, which means in the way that I look at this is it is a minor nonconformance. However, it's the most important minor nonconformance because it has a higher MDSAP rating, because we do need to, per the MDSAP regulations, say, hey, your complaint handling process needs to link to your risk management so that if you find complaints that you've never seen before, you are looking back to your risk management to assure that it's being updated with those now, the possibly new failure mode. The last minor I did as an example of what something that we might actually say is a low level minor issue. And that was preventive maintenance was not completed on production equipment. And so here where we found was that it's not necessarily product related. I could not find any information that says product was non-conforming and was shipped. And normally that information would be caught via the inspection process that the facility does. So if I can't find any reason to say that product that was manufactured on this facility was non-conforming, then it's not, as the risk goes down. And because it is not one of what they consider the high risk processes per se, as in the CAPAs or complaints. It thus then takes it down to a level 1, low level, as I said, minor nonconformance. So, and also, I also said it was a low level because I could find monthly maintenance records. So in many cases, facilities will do monthly, yearly, quarterly, something like that, where I could see here that they've done the maintenance monthly, but the yearly maybe was not available, but yet everything was covered during that monthly. That would have shown if there was any problems with this piece of equipment. So that's just kind of my overview. Patty, do you want me to talk about anything else, or do you want to open it up?
We can open it up right now
Okay.
with this 3. Thank you.
I'll leave this up.
Okay, yes, thank you. Lucía, ¿quieres comenzar? Lucía in Vima, Colombia.
Lucia, would you like to start?
Creo que se desconectó. Seguimos entonces con Giovanna Benítez. ¿Te puedes?
Well, let's move on to Giovanna Benítez. Would you like to address the question?
Giovanna de la
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hola.
Buenos días a todos. En nuestra opinión, nosotros
Hello,
estamos
good afternoon. So in our opinion, we agree with the non-conformity classification. However, I would like to add that the regulation in Chile is going through a lot of changes. We are waiting for a change in a law at Congress right now, where we will have the regulation of all medical devices and be able to inspect everything. Right now, we have a low percentage of medical devices regulated. We are also working to be able to apply this law, and we're working considering all the criteria of international harmonization. I would like to add that we would like to thank you for this webinar and for the MDSAP training. Thank you very much.
A continuación, COFEPRIS, si nos pueden comentar sobre su regulación.
¿Qué tal? Buenos días. Para el caso de
We have
México,
another
nuestra
comment
regulación...
about a specific regulation. So regarding Mexico, we have a grading of non-conformities that are defined by the modalities as well. So in this case, regarding risks, if you face a non-conformity, how would you define if the facility would be certified or not?
Edgardo. ¿Sí?
En el caso de COFEPRIS,
sí
tenemos clasificaciones, pero solamente para certificados de buenas prácticas. Se clasifican en mayores cuando hay un riesgo al producto, a la calidad del producto.
We have the classification of some practices that are classified as severe or major. Regarding people, and they're minor regarding the quality of the product, but they're not a risk for people. And we have a different classification when we have a non-conformity in the product, but it's also a risk for people, for the consumers. So how are we to address these classifications?
Okay. Okay, muchas gracias. Argentina.
I'm sorry, but we couldn't hear you very well. So let's talk a little bit about Argentina and its regulations.
For the our regulation in Argentina, we have one Mercosur regulation, and which is also applied in Brazil. And in this case, it helps us because it's similar to the Brazilian legislation. As for the classification that we have in for non-conformities and conformities, compliances and non-compliances, we do use with using grade observations and not grades, and it's made of, as Lydia explained, with grades related to the product, and we are concurring with the regulations that we have here in our country. The only thing is that we discussed this internally in order to have a consensus, a broad view. So we discussed that in the case of the last point, in which you have number 1, it actually the product is not the product not accepted because it's related to the maintenance, because maybe annually it has some update or some maintenance on the equipment, and this can change the manufacturing of the product. So we also carried this in this way in the audit that we had. So we had a different classification for this product. As Abile mentioned, in the case of the grade 4, we would have we'd like to think, what if this product would be delivered to the market? So we also consider as 4 because the product could bring some issues. Thank you, Carolina. Thank you. Colombia.
¿Me escuchan bien?
Sí.
Sí. Perfecto. Bueno,
entonces, okay.
Específicamente, tenemos una
For Colombia specifically, we have a regulation that is in place for 15 years, and it covers a lot of medical devices, most of them based on the translation of documents from English. Nevertheless, in this regulation, we thought that it would be manufacturing would be regulated as GMP, and this is something that we could not carry out yet because it's something that has to be made with the agency and the Ministry of Health. We have been working on that for 4 to 5 years. It's something that's very valuable to us. We are very interested on the harmonization and all the learnings that we can have from this process. And all the board of medical devices has been trained on ISO 13485, and to see what would be the difference in our regulation and where we'd like to go. So today we are auditing manufacturing sites, and we have this concept to use sanitary different sanitary requirements for different products. So the authority audits, we don't have third parties as auditors. Our country, we do not use the ISO 13485 to all places, but we do not classify non-conformities as minors or majors, although we can think that a product cannot be go to market without all the requirements, such as the sterilization example that you mentioned. But here, as a sanitary agency, we classify as minor or major,
tienen que cumplirlas
We have a
todas
lot of them, and manufacturers have to comply all of them and have all of them resolved in order to have a certification. So we are very strict. In an audit,
tiempo de 60
we
días
have a deadline of 60 days to correct all the non-compliances, and when it's solved, we can issue the certification that
auditorías de seguimiento, sino es tiene una
we don't have audits right now, but
como lo hacemos en este momento.
they have a deadline that is provided for.
Trabajar
This is how we work right now, and we like to work in this legislation in order to have something more global soon. Thank you.
Billy, BJ, podemos presentar las siguientes y no sé si nos puedes ayudar haciendo eso.
Now we can have the next. Can you zoom in your test? Carolina would like to say something. Yes, Carolina.
Y en el caso nuestro de Argentina también, digamos, para la obtención de la autoridad.
In the case of Argentina, we also work with the sanitary body, and the manufacturer has to solve all the NCs that we found within the audit scope, because we have a certificate of habilitation of the manufacturer, and we must have all that NCs must be solved. There are some questions within the observations that maybe can be solved, especially if there's a documentation problem regarding major NCs, and that may require some work on the floor. It's something that I would like to clarify. Our sanitary authority, we take this very seriously. If there is any, even when we have minors, if we detect a NC, it must be solved, a minor or a major. Maybe it's not an action that is required, but it has to have to look at all the documents to see if it was dealt. Any other representative from regulatory agency would like to say something or comment something? You can write on the chat box or on the Q&A.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfecto.
So let's proceed then.
So Patty, do you want me to keep going?
Yes, please.
Okay. So just kind of to talk through a few of the questions I heard. One was about I'm going to say closure, I believe, of non-conformances. That is something I wanted to point out, that we do require that in the case of, especially this, we'll use the major as an example, we will not issue a new certificate until we have closed this non-conformance completely. So we try to schedule our audits fairly well in advance of their certificates expiring, because until we have the full information that they have completely fixed this, if closed the CAPA that they may have opened, provided all the information to us, those certificates would not be issued to the manufacturer at that point in time. For minor non-conformances, we just require that the information for their plan is submitted to us and that we agree with that plan. So we will be very specific with a manufacturing site if they came back to me and said that we're going to update our process and that's their only response. I'm not going to accept that response. I am going to ask for dates. I'm going to ask for the procedures they're going to update, more information about what they're going to update prior to accepting that plan with all of those due dates. And I'm going to agree. We do ask that within 6 months that their due date falls within that 6-month closure period before we would issue certificates when it came to a minor nonconformance. So we don't necessarily wait for full closure of a minor to issue a certificate. However, if at 6 months they do not give me information that they completed that information, I will start the process of pulling back their certificate. So that was one. And I think there was another comments about the grading. I just wanted to clarify. So the MDSAP grade is built into the system. And I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to open up the actual MDSAP NC form so I can kind of show what that is to explain a little bit of how we get to those MDSAP grades. It can be a little confusing. So when we are filling out the NC, make this a lot bigger because that is really small. This non-conforming grading is something that is directly filled in that will automatically give me this grade. So just wanted to talk through this a bit. So QMS impact, indirect means, as I stated before, no product. It's a system issue, not a product issue. Direct would be product. Again, if it's a repeat, yes or no. Absence of a procedure, required procedure, is there. So we're saying if there was not a procedure, I'll do this quick, I'll change this to yes, you'll see that the grade goes up. And if non-conforming products were released, and again, it'll change things as they go up and change those grades. So I just wanted to point that out a little bit, that the MDSAP grading is pretty much not something that us as a auditing organization determines, whereas it's slightly different for this major minor. I can make that call, although I would never make an MDSAP grade 1 a minor or a major, but that is something that right now, as it stands, just to clarify to the different regulatory authorities, that this is the way that it was built. So these checkboxes really determine this number for me. It is not a number that us as an auditing organization sets up. Patty, is there anything else that I was missing that you thought could be explained better?
No, I guess not, but let me ask. ¿Alguien más de nuestros reguladores tiene alguna pregunta o algún tema que quisieran que
Do you have
aclarara?
any questions or any comments that you would like to ask PJ, or she can proceed with her presentation? Do you?
A mí me gustaría, hacer una consulta, DJ.
I would like to ask something, yes.
Según lo que entiendo,
I understand that
¿no? Y ustedes
it's something that is it's provided by MDSAP. And while we are writing, the process will do this automatically and will provide a grade. But if at any time, and I speak as a sanitary authority, at any time that we can, it is related to the experience of the inspector of the finding, because it can change, because we found something on the maintenance, for example. It was considered as minor because it didn't cause any impact on the product, but it can bring an impact on the worker. So it was required that the change of a part that, so if there's an accident within the installation, you as sanitary authority, within these tools, how can you write this on the form?
Okay, so I want to make sure that I understand. So if it is safety related, so if I will make sure that I'm, excuse me, understanding you're saying that if maintenance was not completed and it made the equipment unsafe for the operator, is that correct? Okay. Patty's saying yes. If that's the case, that is not something that as an auditing organization right now, we actually cover. I know in the United States, it's OSHA. I'm guessing every country out there has their own set of regulations that is for worker safety. But as an auditing organization, as it stands, right now, we will only cover those items that are product related for the consumer, not necessarily for the workers. So that would be something that I would say we may comment on. I have when I've seen safety issues, but it is not something that I would ever issue as a non-conformance. Does that answer your question?
Sí, muchas gracias.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Me están recordando por acá que si por favor pueden prender su cámara cuando participen para facilitarle a los intérpretes la
We have
traducción.
other questions, and I would like to ask you to open up your cameras to help us with the simultaneous translation whenever you're asking your question. Any other regulatory authority that would like to add a question or a comment, please raise your hands. Sorry, do we have someone?
Is there a chance that we can voice the question that is already posted in the Q&A before getting to the next? Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to do that because that's the only one. We have one question that says, do non-conformity grades and classification depend on the product risk class?
They do not. I'm going to try to see if it says it doesn't. I don't think on this form anywhere. So again, I'm going to use this as an example. So the way that these are set up are more based on the ISO clause or the specific, here I did one here. The specific country related clauses. So here you can see that we used infrastructure from the ISO 13485 document, sorry. And then this specific clause was also something that Brazil had a specific item noted in their regulations for. So I guess what I would say is if there is something that is a low risk device, I might look at it slightly differently than I would, let's say, a pacemaker, which is, going to keep somebody alive, versus maybe a bandage that's not something that's going to kill anyone. I might look at it differently, but in the sense of the regulations and how they are written as non-conformances, it wouldn't be taken into account. If this piece of equipment in this example made either of those products, I would look at it in the sense of how is the system non-conforming. That being said, kind of going back a little bit, to this indirect versus direct if, because of this non-conformance, I found that product was shipped to a customer that was non-conforming, that would automatically change this from indirect to direct, which it's not letting me click on it right now for some reason, but that would automatically change that to a direct because the issue now isn't just the maintenance, it is maintenance and the fact that non-conforming product was shipped. And in reality, I probably would still write this maintenance finding as a minor, but I would write another non-conformance that said, due to this maintenance issue, non-conforming product was shipped to a customer, and that would then fall under the category 4 or 5, depending on the other grading questions.
Okay, thank you. So there are no more questions.
Okay, so I want to go back to this document a little bit and just kind of show you. So this is where the actual non-conformance, this other form that I just showed you. This is truly just the non-conformance, the statement of the non-conformity and the supporting evidence section. I want to just go back a little bit to show you in the tasks themselves how we would do this. So in, let's get all the way back to the beginning. I'm sorry, I'm scrolling fast and I'm hoping. Okay, so under production and process and service controls, which is a specific chapter, under this section 11.6, we will cover each of the tasks and, like I said, what we looked at and what in any discussions that were had. So if you look under here, I've highlighted these. Here is where I talked about the preventive maintenance that I looked at, in which specific thing where it was found that maintenance was not completed. And then if you kind of look, the major was farther down. There's a lot of information in these sections, which is what makes this report very, very complex. But here is where we talked about that production lot was released into inventory on a certain date prior to the release of those testings. So the report itself will contain the specifics, not only as to how the non-conformance was written, but where we found what we discussed. This report here was something I just created for this presentation. I would say normally, if I found an issue like this, there would be actually much more information in there that would talk about what I saw at the point in time. How did I determine that product did not leave the control of the facility? How did I get to that decision that there was no risk to the customer? I did not put all that information in here because it was getting to be very, very long, and I felt like this is going to be so overwhelming to anybody who pulls this up and reads it that it's a lot of information. So that is something that when you get this document as a regulatory authority, I would say it was standardized to hopefully make it easier for you to find information. But on the other hand, it still is a lot of information. These reports tend to be 60, 70 pages long, I think. So you really get a lot of that. But what the thought process was is that in the text area would give you everything. And then that's why in the section 12, we also gave you more, and just these are the non-conformances themselves, in hopes that you can quickly scan, see what the non-conformances are, and make your decisions on whether or not you feel like you need to go out and do a separate audit, which can happen, or B, you're okay with what we have done, and so on. Actually, before I go on, I wanted to point out one other thing. On this form, these green sections here are the sections that will be filled out by the customer or by the client for us, as to how they will fix this nonconformance. So they will give us their investigation and root cause analysis, their proposed corrections, anything that they've done immediately, and corrective actions, which is anything that will take more time. And as I said before, then this would be depending on the severity of the nonconformance. We would give them, say, okay, dates need to be done. This needs to be done within 30 days. This needs to be done within 6 months, depending on what exactly the issue was. And then once they fill out that first section, then I can fill out here that says that they've responded and say yes. And then that the outcome of its causes are adequate, yes. And that they've specified adequate corrections. Like that would be that their plan is okay. And then if it has that they're still in the plan, then I would say no. And that, oops, I got to do one more box. Sorry. Is it this one? Yes. And then no here. Okay, there we go. And if I say that I agree with their plans, I agree that they've got a good timeline, it'll change this to pending implementation. Then if this goes back to them, they would fill out the second section, which is the evidence of that actual implementation. And then I can say that change these to both yes, that they've completed it, and I can either say pending implementation effectiveness check, which we ask that within that time frame we give them, they complete their effectiveness checks as well. Or I can say yes, and I'm still missing something. This should, oh, there it is, that one. It should say verified. So that's how you would also, as an auditing organization, get a copy of this form as well, which would then show you as I go along. My report doesn't change. My report determined there were nonconformances, but this form will be updated and keep being sent into that database so that as a regulatory authority, they can track to assure that items are being completed. Now, during this process is when we did talk about they can contact us at any time and say, you know, you said this, you agreed with it, can you give us more information? Or we're not sure, we agree, we want to make sure that we understand your process. And then we would, in that process, work with the regulatory body and say why we did what we did and assure. But in that case, I would say in the most cases, if they don't agree with, I guess I should say it's really unlikely that they don't agree with us, but we have had instances where based on this, just the severity of this nonconformance, they have come out right after us and done their own audits to assure that they feel that everything that's specific to their regulations are being covered. So that's the one thing, and that it is it's a complex system, but it does actually we do our best to make sure that as we are doing things that we're notifying those regulatory agencies, because you know that it not only affects their MDSAP certificate for us, it could affect whether or not an agency decides that a product needs a recall or something like that. So we are very much working with them, and which is why there is the 5-day notification for any grade 5s, is so that if you as a regulatory agency want to force a recall, per your regulations, then that can happen right away versus waiting until we get through this whole process of verifying their plans and stuff like that. Okay, let me minimize this again. So if there's questions, you guys go ahead and just ask me as we go, because I think that'll be the easiest process, since this is there's a lot of information here. And I just wanted to show that at the end of each section, so in this section here, so we've moved this, the top section was 11.6. There you can see that there is a summary just at the bottom of each section as well that says non-conformity, yes, and then those numbers. Or the next section then would be purchasing, which I did not fill in just based on timing and all that information, and we were focusing more on production anyway. There would be non-conformity, no. So it's another quick way for organizations, hopefully, to see which sections had those issues or not. One of the things I kind of also want, and I lost, there it is. I'm going to jump to the first page just to kind of show you this section here is kind of where I was talking about before, that the design and manufacturing, or the certification scopes that would be part of this audit. There are several of these that will show up. However, we will only, there's actually check boxes on the actual documentation, but we will only choose those which are certified by us. So as a customer, they're allowed to say, I only want, in this case, Australia and Brazil. I do not want any of the other markets. Either they're not selling there, or like with the US, it's a choice. If you want to do MDSAP with the US, otherwise you can just leave it to the FDA to have them come out on their regular schedules. So this is where we would note any of those countries' regulations, country-specific regulations, so that I know some of the other countries do use the MDSAP reports, even though they're not necessarily MDSAP specific requirements on their regulations, but they could see then is in the case of Australia. In Australia, you can follow the European Union CE marking process, and they will accept that as well. So if that was a case, we could mark this CE marking as well, and then Australia would know that if they saw this and they didn't see their own name, that we are at least auditing them to CE mark. So it is a way for other countries to look at this and say, okay, do I have something similar to Brazil, let's say, at least you know that we looked at the Brazilian regulations, and thus we would be looking close to that if you weren't going to be a true add-in to the MDSAP. I know that there's some of the countries that do use it that way.
Okay, we have a question.
Yeah.
Let me just read it. And I guess this one is for COFEPRIS. Para el caso de dispositivos médicos de importación en México, ¿qué certificado debe presentarse al momento?
In the case of Mexico and the import of the medical devices, should we use MDSAP or ISO 13485? And I think this is a question for someone in the Mexican Health Authority.
No?
No?
Okay.
Okay.
If it helps, no. I will say...
Perdón, Alicia, ¿te tenemos conectada?
Sí. Hola, se desconectaron.
Hi. It's not connected, I think. They're not connected right now.
Perdón, Lorena, no sé si estés
Lorena, can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. Can you help us with this question, Lorena? I don't know if you are there. Can you help us?
de autorización sanitaria.
Or someone from the sanitary authority in Mexico?
Pati, si no, tomo la consulta y les transmitiremos la respuesta en breve.
Ok, perfecto. Muchas gracias.
We'll ask and then we'll have the answer for you later, okay? Thank you.
And I did just want to add, the MDSAP program is based on ISO 1345. So the basis of all of the tasks will start with the ISO 1345 standard clause. So in a sense, if you are doing MDSAP, you are actually also doing ISO 1345. So still doesn't help with everything you asked, but at least just to clarify a little.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So is there any other question from any of the attendees? Okay, I see a raised hand. Cofepris, están levantando la mano, por favor, si pueden contestar.
¿Sí me escucha?
Sí.
Hola.
Hola.
Hola, en cuanto a la pregunta sobre los documentos.
I have a question regarding documents that are required for exports of medical devices. Are MDSAP and ISO 13485 both accepted for the registration of medical devices? Yes, thank you for both. Then they are accepted for both. Thank you. Any other question? Comments?
Going once.
Okay.
So I do have a curiosity question kind of to put out for some of the agencies that are doing audits. Based on, what we've talked about. So here, I'll try to scroll down and try to cover where it talks about the different, the different processes. So we have management, we have CAPAs and complaints, we have purchasing. Is this something that would be similar to the countries that are doing this, or is this something that is a different process? Are they doing audits in a different manner? If anybody would be willing to answer that question.
¿Voluntariamos personas?
Bueno, yo contesto si quieren con respecto a Argentina.
Gracias, Carolina.
I would like to answer for the Argentinian side. Thank you, Carolina. As for the inspections that we carry out as sanitary authority, we have an inspection. We have a site inspection, and we do it as a routine. We first have an inspection, and then we search on the installation on site how the equipment is and the procedures, and then we look at the documents and then look at the quality systems. If it's a company that is already been audited by us and it's functioning at the moment, usually when I have this path, we go, we sample some products, or we take the master registration, which is the history of the product, and we check how it's manufactured, what pieces of equipment are used, and what documents are related to these processes. For example, how this equipment, this specific piece of equipment is used. And so we trace the audit while we find in our search. So there's a lot of products within a company, and we take the most critical product as an axis of our audit. Something that they have in the inventory, or because we do not carry out an audit to make a difference. We called it inspection in auditing. And when we issue a certificate, if the company has a product with two medical devices, a pacemaker and other product that's not related to it at all, we will take the certification for one product and not for the one or the other. So as authority, we ask the company to that manufactures product to certificate specifically. So as for the pacemaker, for example, it's a more critical product because it has more risks, and we ask or a mask. I don't know if I answered properly your question.
You did. I'm curious to see. So
yes,
part of the process with MDSAP, I very much see the FDA manner of auditing, doing inspections in the MDSAP process. Since they trained me to how to do audits in the first place, I can see how that was brought into this auditing process with some inputs from the other countries. However, I don't necessarily think that it always follows every national process out there and how they do this. And so I was curious to see, I know that there's things that we look at that some regulatory authorities don't necessarily care about. And there's items that maybe we don't get to see because unless I pull that specific regulation up, I would not know on how to, out of what to look for. So it was kind of a curiosity based on your countries. If you're going to use this as something, you know, it was more just kind of curiosity how this fits into that process, because I do really believe this using the MDSAP is a really good idea. It really helps out the manufacturers. Seeing as I've been on both sides, I've worked in manufacturing and worked for regulators. I can see the aid that this does in one audit report for everybody, one audit and stuff like that and stuff. So but I also want to know, you know, it's possible that we could change things to make it better for everyone and all that. And so that was more of a curiosity question on my end as we do these. One point I did want to point out, you brought up certificates, and that made me think a little bit. So our certificates for MDSAP are different than I would say our certificates would be for the European Union. So in the sense of the European Union, we are very specific as to this certificate is for this product, for this scope. We might have multiple certificates based on the different types of products they manufacture. Our MDSAP certificates are not necessarily product specific. So on our MDSAP certificates, you will see that we are certifying them to MDSAP, not that each of the products they have are certified to MDSAP. It's more as the corporation, they would get a certificate from us. And so I just was thinking that through to point that out as an overall process to think about, is that, you know, we do look at the products, we do a risk-based audit, as in if you have what we would in the United States call a class 1 device, which is very low risk, versus a class 3 device, which is very high risk, and I have to choose which one I'm looking at, I am going to choose the higher risk device process to follow when I'm going out into manufacturing, because I'm more worried about that product with the end consumer than I am something that's has less risk. However, we also do look at it risk-based based on management review. So I'm trying to see if I talked about management reviews in here. But what we will do is, so when we go through, it's task 9. No, that's organization structure. Now I'm not going to remember the tasks off the top of my head, but risk management planning. So when we are going through our management review, we are always looking, that's the first thing we start with is management, every audit. And it's our looking at, does management have control over the system? Does management know what's going on? Are their management reviews actually helping? And in that, we are also looking at their risk management process and making risk-based decisions. So if I will, my first question usually when I start talking through management is saying, how do you incorporate risk management into your system? Looking for them to answer specifically that in CAPAs they do this, in complaints they do that. If they don't, for sure, I will look more into that when I get to those specific sections. But the other thing I'm doing is in their risk management, we will look at their management review output. So unlike the FDA, I can now look at that information. But I will look at that output and say, okay, I notice here you have a negative trend, let's say in your preventive maintenance. You are not completing preventive maintenance on time, meeting your requirement of, let's say, 80% of preventive maintenance conducted on time. That will trigger me to, when I get to that section of preventive maintenance, to say, maybe I need to look into this process a little bit more and assure that product has not left the facility that was done on equipment that was out of maintenance and was giving false readings, let's say. So that is something that we do very much look at in the beginning. The first day is what I call our determination day. We're looking through the management processes. We're looking at their documents. We're looking for anything that would point me to a possible issue that I should follow up on. So this process, although it's very rigid in the fact that it has specific topics that I have to cover, it does not stop me from going deeper into those areas that I find a non-conformance on, or that I might have a non-conformance. I still have to meet my timeframes, but I will maybe spend a little less time if, let's say, preventive maintenance doesn't show any issues in risk management, but calibration does. I tend to work those two in around the same time when I'm looking at the documentation, because it's usually the same group I'm speaking to. I will say, okay, risk management or preventive maintenance, I'll spend slightly less time on, and I'll take more time on the calibration side to assure that I feel that that system is working properly and giving us valid results, and thus making sure that product measurements, let's say, are not incorrect because of something being out of calibration. So that is something kind of very, I don't think it's probably as clearly called out when you read the MDSAP document that is what we're doing, but we really are doing that. And the other thing is the calculations are really, I don't know, how they figured these out, but they're pretty accurate. I would have to say, with the exception of a few times where I've gotten into something really big or I couldn't get my head around, I couldn't understand their process. I pretty much can stay on task, feel like I've gotten a very good review of all of these systems in the time allotted for that task or chapter. Okay, let's see. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that, based on what people have said, that I might want to explain better. Let me go to production, because I wanna focus on that a little bit more. Measurement and analysis improvements. Let's see. Also, I wanted to point out that based on what we find in management and also in the measurement analysis improvement, so such as CAPAs or complaints, that will push us into our directions of what products to choose, as well as risk for production or for design. So if, let's say, you have 3 different class 3 devices, and we've looked at them all in the past 2 years, we might have touched all of them. I then have a choice. Okay, which one do I want to go to? I will look at complaints and I will look at CAPAs and say, which of those items seems to have more issues, which of those products has more issues, which will push me then into a specific production line. And we usually, when I'm talking about in the beginning tasks, which again, since this isn't an actual audit report, there's some things that are not necessarily in this. I will say, based on complaints rates of higher than, let's say, 25% on this product has been chosen to review during the audit. We do try to make sure we cover all production. If they've got multiple shifts of production, so if they're producing 24 hours a day, we try to assure that we're covering all of those different time periods to sometime during that 3-year cycle, to say that, because I mean, at least in my experience, it seems that the overnight processes are the ones that auditors like to do the least, and are usually where we will find some problems, because people get a little complicit with nobody's ever looking at them. And so we do try to assure that we are covering all of those cycles, or I mean all those different processes and different times. I have to say that is my least favorite one to audit. I'm not a late night person, so it's always the hardest one for me to do, but I sometimes will get up very early in the morning and come in that way. And I have found some very interesting things. And the other thing is that we do try to talk to at least all the product lines to some extent while we're doing that. Some of the large manufacturers, we do it more by family than we would by necessarily every single product and every single maybe size. So I'm just using as an example, like heart valves, they'll come in multiple different sizes, different diameters. However, the process is usually the same for all of them. So in that case, we would take, okay, that product family, we will watch one size being manufactured and move on and say, okay, based on the fact that on that specific size, there's a high likelihood that the other sizes are being manufactured properly as well. One of the things that I like to do, I can't say that all auditors do this, but I like to once in a while choose the size. So usually we'll say, okay, this is maybe highest risk, highest seller. And we'll look at that because that's the one that has the most impact in the market. Once in a while, I'll do it the opposite, and I will say I'll take one of the very high risks, but some of the ones that aren't sold very often, just because, again, if they're not running the process every day, it might be one that they don't, that they, has some more issues to it. So that is something that, although it's MDSAP is very stringent in some senses, because like I said, we have to follow the process. We have to go in their orders. We have to make sure that we cover these tasks. But on the other hand, it does give us options to be flexible, to make sure that we get a good handle for the company that we're working with, to say, I really feel like that even though I only looked at one product at this audit, that the rest of them are under control and that we're shipping safe and effective products out to the customers, and that I can, go back to these regulatory agencies and say, I truly feel that these guys know what they're doing. Or on the other hand, we really have some problems and we're going to be, starting the process of removing certificates. And we do very much all have our own process of making, the decisions of how we choose products. We all have our own process of maybe how we run the tasks together. Like I said, a lot of times for me, certain tasks fit together better, but I'm still within that overarching chapter. And so I might ask task numbers, in very different orders than my co-auditor, but we're still making sure we get in the end to that same determining factor of, does this actually give me the sense that product out that is leaving this facility is a good product?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. And as you said, reading the documents from the MDSAP doesn't give us the whole idea and details that you have just mentioned. And now that you're mentioning CAPAs and follow-ups and trends, that's something that a question that just popped in my head, that it could be for the regulators, our fellow regulators that are participating, mainly on the part that they said that they won't issue a certificate unless every non-conformity or finding is closed. So how's the process actually? So do you stop the inspection and then go back to the firm? I don't know what would be like the process, or do you just deny the certificate and let them to fulfill and have everything in place before you go again for a second inspection? So that's a question that I have. So Lucia or ANMAT or COFEPRIS, que nos puedan platicar un poquito cómo es este proceso cuando están esperando a que se cierren esas no conformidades antes de dar un certificado. Ustedes detienen inspección, regresan a hacer otra inspección o le dan cierto tiempo a la empresa para que les provea evidencia de que hicieron todas estas actividades de corrección, que hicieron esta evaluación.
You can take all the activities in order to have the evaluation of the product. How do you proceed in this process? Lucia, can you answer that? I was thinking about how would I answer that. I'm from Colombia.
Carolina.
Patricia, yo te cuento cómo hacemos nosotros.
Sí, por favor,
Carolina. A ver, obviamente, dependiendo del tipo de no conformidad.
Obviously, the non-conformity and the incidence of the non-conformity that we find is something that we are looking for. Maybe the action requires a new visit on the installation on site, or maybe It's something that we can solve with documentation. It will depend on the type of the incidents and the number of incidents and the type of nonconformity. It's when we found something that is very important, we have some on-site visits, and generally it means that we have to go different times on place and check. We can find something wrong within the warehouse or the production line, and we have to check each case to see if the situation was solved before the certification. But when we have nonconformities that do not require a visit or an action on site, as we mentioned, or a specific action, we just they just need a change in a document, maybe a new writing or a document. We do that, and once we carry this out, the implementation plan, we can issue the certificates. And when we go back for a new inspection, we inspect it every 2 years. It's a little more complicated at the moment, but when we inspect, we look for documents and how they implemented the changes that they were asked for. But sometimes this implementation can take a long time, and the company cannot work in the country while it's not certified. So it depends on the type of the nonconformity, and something that we also have to deal with the company and how they will fix their nonconformities. So both, it's all included in the same visit. Thank you. Any other comment? I have a question here. Patricia? BJ, I don't know if I understood correctly. How can we work with risks when we do we have to carry out an evaluation of risk in order to standardize the good practices? Or well, we monitor constantly and we update with all the feedbacks that we have from different areas, as in the case mentioned here, the practical case that was mentioned here about the complaints not being essential for risk management. But we consider this essential because they have to be included. But sometimes companies complain about that their delivery system, because they have some logistics issue. We had cases here in which a complaint that we investigated was related to a change of method on delivering the product, and it was something that was not considered in the risk management process. So we followed up the process and we explained this change. So risk management is a continuing process. Our standard was enabled in 2013, and before that we have some norms to check the product. Every time you have to register a product, we have to check if there was a previous complaint about it. And from that, we start consider all the system. We look not only for the risk of the product itself, but all the process of manufacturing and other factors that can affect the product. within this this type of evaluation. Thank you. Thank you, Carolina. We have a question now for can a company carry out a manufacturing activity of medical devices before the certification, or can it proceed without the certification?
Okay. The answer is yes and no.
Those are the best.
Yeah. They can. So our requirement to come in for what we call their stage 2 audit. So at the stage 1 audit, they are allowed to just have procedures. The stage 2 audit needs to have product manufactured for us to assess, to say that the process is working. So we do allow them to manufacture without a certificate, but not, it has to have controls around it to assure that it's not shipped anywhere. So it unless they have are doing a clinical trial and they have proper approvals within that country for that clinical trial. But if it's truly just to get a certificate from DECRA for the product, we will say you may manufacture. You have to prove to me everything that was manufactured is still sitting somewhere in your warehouse. And then I can watch the process. I can assess the manufacturing process and assess the inspection, final release that you do. And then I will issue the certificate. So we do allow it, but only for, like I said, those products have to be very much controlled and not being shipped anywhere unless they have the clinical trials.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Las autoridades tienen que dejar transparente para los solicitantes fabricantes.
Authorities have to make it transparent for the manufacturers in order to evaluate the, I'm sorry, I lost the last part of the question. I'm really sorry. Can you repeat the question, please?
No tiene quien nos envió la pregunta, pero no sé si nos podías aclarar un poquito más.
Would you please clarify a little the question about if this if transparency is necessary?
No sé si nos pudieran aclarar.
If you can clarify the question, please. It was an anonymous question, so I don't. If the authorities can make more the process more transparent. And also there's a question from Maria Elena, what about class 3? And so Maria Elena, if you could also clarify your question about class 3.
Adelante, por favor.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Rosario Nava. A mí me gustaría...
Good afternoon. I would like to know a little more about how the audits are carried out and the certification process in Mexico specifically. We also have a risk system, which is a risk management system based on a previous visits that were done within the company. When we carry out these visits, we can focus exclusively on the critical issues. And then we have two types of audits. One that I mentioned, with the risk management system and the recertification audit. In the first visit, we have a format that was established with 108 questions that show specifically the sites, how the products are manufactured, how they are validated, etc. But another point that I would like to make is we have a certification that is issued for the company and the facility. We check the product and we check the process. But from this document, we issue the certificate specific for a product or a family of products on the request of the interested party for maybe for export, for other processes.
Ok, ya nos aclararon una de las preguntas. So, question
Okay,
is,
so we have one of the questions answered so far.
MDSAP certification. And the second question is that if medical devices class 3 will be included also in Mexico.
Patty, was that for me? I only caught the end of it.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
I guess that is for COFEPRIS.
Okay.
Because
thank you. I figured it wasn't, but I just wanted to make sure.
No, the question is if COFEPRIS is planning to be part of the countries working under the MDSAP certification. And the second question is that if the medical devices class 3 will be also included in Mexico. So, COFEPRIS, ¿tendrán alguna respuesta sobre este tema?
Does COFEPRIS have an answer about that?
Solo te estamos aplicando para clase 1 y 2 en términos de certificación de buenas prácticas.
Actually, we are applying for class 2 for the problems in manufacturing. We're already working on the forms so that we can be part of MDSAP.
Okay.
We will apply that to all types of manufacturers. Thank you.
So there are no more questions, comments? Well, okay, so with that, I guess, Billy Joe, if you have something else to comment or to close.
No, I don't think so. I think that, you know, just from my point of view, which, you know, probably is minor compared to some of the regulatory agencies, but I would have to say that learning this process of how to do the audits for the 5 markets right now that the MDSAP covers was at first a little daunting. There's a lot of regulations to learn, things that I maybe hadn't in the past worked with. I knew obviously FDA quite well, and I had dealt in past jobs with Canada, but some of the other ones were very new to me. That at first I would say it felt like, you know, the idea was great, but maybe implementation was a little lacking. But as I worked with this more, and as I became more familiar with reading through some of the other regulations and making sure that what the differences are. So what I found is a lot of the regulations have some similarities between them. Now, that's not necessarily true for all countries out there, but once you learn really what are the similarities and can say, okay, if I look at this process and if I cover the ISO 1345 for this process, I'm covering everything for the 5 different regulatory agencies, and I know I won't miss anything. It really made the process seem easier for us as auditors, but I also felt like, okay, I can see how it would be easy then to add in other countries to this process as well. And we actually can say, yes, we can cover, I mean, as a one audit to cover 5 or more different countries seems a little crazy sounding, but it really does work. And it really does with the specifics to say, okay, in this task, I might not have special requirements from any country. And so I just follow the task as I would if I was doing an ISO 1345 only audit. Or this task has listed with it maybe 6 other countries, well, maybe 5, if maybe it's all of them have their own specific requirements above and beyond 1345. And I can ask those questions very quickly, very easily, and follow up with that in this process. So, you know, kind of, I guess it's as a, you know, just coming from an auditor, if you're thinking about using MDSAP, I do feel that it does actually, you know, as it stands today, work. Now, maybe if you got 20 different countries, it might be slightly different. But, you know, with the fact right now that we do only have 5 countries, maybe, you know, and then I'm also looking at a 6th country when I look at European Union at the same time. I really do feel like I'm getting a good sense for all of these regulatory agencies to say, yes, I covered your specifics, and that even that, you know, I'm saying it's okay to leave to go to any market out there, that I truly feel that it meets the requirements for your specific market. So just for those who might be thinking about whether or not it's something to look at, I really do feel that, you know, coming out of the FDA and remembering what it was like trying to keep up with the amount of inspections that we had to do, with the amount of investigators we actually had, this really does make sense for some of those companies where, you know, you can leave it to an auditing organization and get the same, you know, a result that you would if you'd sent your own people out. And the training they give us on the specific regulations is very in-depth. And it does really, you know, gave me a really good sense of all the different countries, what they were looking for, what was above and beyond what I would normally have looked for. And what I did for myself was made special questions so that I remembered when I went out, hey, for this task, you have to ask these specific questions because it's not something that my brain went right to. So just my little input on the whole MDSAP process.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been really interesting and in-depth. So we have a better grasp of what the MDSAP audit means. So thank you so much. Con esto ya no tenemos nuevas preguntas. Agradezco muchísimo la participación de las agencias reguladoras.
I don't think we don't have any further questions, and I would like to thank you for the participation of all the agencies that were here and the regulators that were here, our partners in the manufacturing sector, in the companies in the sector. And I think we will have another webinar next week in which we will practice a little more on how can we work and being part of MDSAP with the regulation agents that are not part of MDSAP yet, and a presentation from some agencies that are part of MDSAP and how they are using the documents, the results from the audits. So thank you. Sandra, I think you can have the floor now so you can wrap up our session.
What you're saying on behalf of the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence in the medical technology sector. We really want to thank all participants for your engagement and the valuable information sharing. We appreciate a lot the inputs that we got from the regulatory agencies that joined this webinar today. We're looking forward to meeting you all for the last part of the series next June 17, as Patty mentioned. And last but not least, wish you enjoy the rest of your day and see you all next week. Thank you.